Hello friends, this is Avinash Kumar. Welcome all once again. In this video, we will learn what overloading and overriding in Java are. But before jumping to this topic, let's talk about binding in Java. If you try to understand the meaning of binding, it simply means the connection between two things. In Java, these two things are method call and method definition. So when method call connects to actual method definition, that is called binding. Sometimes the binding happens at compile time and sometimes it happens at runtime. So we have two different types of binding in Java. Those are static and dynamic binding. Static is an example of compile time binding and dynamic is for when method call binds with actual method definition at the runtime. In this example, static binding name method connects to the method definition at the compile time, and after execution it executes the same method which it was bound at the compile time. But at dynamic binding or late binding, it will not happen. At compile time, method call will connect to different method definition. At the runtime, it will be execute different method. Let's take an example. Here in this example, we can see that we have two different classes. Those are class A and class binding. Class binding extends class A. That means the binding class is a child of class A. Here we are going to introduce one more feature of inheritance. Let's take a live example to understand this new feature. Suppose you got an invitation to the party and at the invitation card your father's name is written. Then it means in that party you can also go to represent your father if your father is busy or out of the town. But in different scenario, when at the invitation card your name is written and you are busy or out of the town, then your father cannot go to your party on behalf of you. The same thing you can see in the programming too. In this example, you can see that the object of child, that is binding, its reference is being held by its parent class reference variable, and then we try to call static binding method on that reference value. At compile time you can see that it binds with class A static binding method. However, at runtime we get different output. That means the method of binding class has been executed. That is known as late binding or dynamic binding. Now let's try to understand what is method overriding. To understand that, let's take a live example. Suppose your father is having a car and you are not having any car. If you want to go to the bazaar, you will use your father's car to go to the bazaar. But you have bought your own car and now you want to go to the bazaar by car. Now you will go with your own car. Here you have overridden your selection of car. The same thing is in the programming. If some method is not present in the child class and method has been called into the child class, the JVM will check this method into his immediate parent class. If the method is not present of that class, then again it will be checked at grandparent class and so on. Or at compile time itself it will be give an error. One more thing I want to add, that is, if a class does not extend any class, in Java, by default, Java makes that class as a child of object class. Now let's try to understand how we can achieve method overriding in Java programming. When child class creates method having the same signature, that is called method overriding. It has some rules. Let's talk about that. To override any method, child-parent relationship must be required. That means only parent class method can be overridden. Next one is method signature should be the same. That means method name and argument will be same. We have an exception with the return type. We can take as a subtype of parent return type. I will explain this on live demo. Next one is a child cannot restrict access modifier. That means scope modifier of overridden method cannot be changed from public to private or public to protected. But we are allowed to change the scope from protected to the public into the overridden method. Means we can up the scope from private to public or protected to public. Next one is final and static method cannot be overridden. Next, a private method cannot be overridden because the private method cannot be inherited. The scope of the private method lies into the class only, since it cannot be accessible into the child, so it cannot be overridden. Next one is the method that is overridden cannot throw new or broader checked exception at the time of overridden, or the checked exception than the superclass or parent class method. I will explain this topic also into the live demo. This method overriding is also known as one of the example of late binding or dynamic binding. Now let's see some rules of method overloading. When multiple methods having same method name but different arguments in a single class are known as method overloading. In method overloading, method can return different values or method can throw any type of exception too. A static or final method can also be overloaded. Now let's take the live demo. So in live demo, let's start with examples. So now we are going to see the binding examples. In this example, what I have made a class A, and also I have made a different class named binding example, and this class is extending class A. It means that this is a child of class A. So let's try to understand first static binding. In the static binding, what is over here? An object is being created in the same reference type. I'm holding the object reference in the same reference variable name. And here I'm going to execute this static binding. When I'm trying to connect at the compile time, it's connect to this method. If we see over here also, it says that method of binding example, and here it is binding at the time of compile time. Now let's try to run it. It gives the static binding, means the same method has been executed. But moving to next example, what I have done some changes is that I have created an object, but I kept that reference of this object into the parent reference. Class A reference variable is holding the reference of this parent object. When I'm trying to see this, which actually it is pointing, now it is pointing the dynamic binding method of class A. Here you also can see that method of class A, what I have written into the Java docs. Means right now it is pointing to class A method definition. Yes, here you can see that. After clicking on this, it is saying that it is pointing right now to method of class A. But at the time of execution, what I'm able to see is it is pointing to class binding example. Means it is pointing to this method. At the runtime, this method has been executed. This definition is not executed at the runtime. It happens because at the runtime, the object of this class we have find over here, so this method has been executed. So it says at the compile time it was pointing to different method, but at the runtime it is pointing to different method or executed the different method. That is actually a binding which happened at the late time, so or at the execution time. So this is a perfect example of late binding. Now moving to different example. Now we try to understand the parent of all. It means that here what actually I'm trying to do is I'm putting the object into the reference of child, because in this example what we have seen, class A is parent of class binding example. So I'm putting the object of class A into the child reference. So as I told in the presentation that a father cannot go at the time of invitation of the child, means where the child is invited, parent cannot go. So the same example is here. The parent is not able to assign into the child. But what I'm doing over here, I'm putting the object of A into the reference variable of object class. Now it is allowed because as I told into the demo also, that if a class does not have any parent, then by default the parent of that class will be kept as a child of object class. So this is allowed over here. So it proves that what I told is if a class does not have any parent, means Java assign its parent by default, and that class is object class. That actually present in Java Lang package. Now moving to next example. In this live demo, what actually I'm trying to explain is the rules of overriding any method. So here what I have done, I have created a class parent, and also I have created a child class. Child class is extending the parent class. So it's done that both are in relation of child parent. Means for example of overriding, we must have a relation between two classes in child parent relation. Now I have created our notation override. This notation checks at the compile time that it fulfill all the conditions of overriding or not. So if I'll do any mistake, it will prompt us that it is not a overriding. Now what I have said that in demonstration, that method having the same signature can only be override. So I have created a return integer method and return integer method here. So if I'll put the same signature, it satisfies, means now the overriding is done. But I also told that in a demonstration that the subtype can be a return type. So What here it is that class, what here it is means we know that the parent of all the classes is an object class. So it is also allowed if in child you are returning the child of return type, or we can say that return the subtype. What actually I have told you that I'll explain in a live demo. This is the explanation. Means a overridden method can return the child of return type of parent class. So here it can be done, but we cannot do this. Means the parent is returning child of child class return type. Means here the object is parent, so you cannot do this. It gives an error that incompatible type. Okay, so it is not allowed. Okay, now moving to next. So here what I have explained is method signatures should be same, or the child of return type can be put into the child method. Now moving to next different example, that is exception. Since till now I have not covered the exception topic, so I want to brief something about that. In the exception is a parent one, the parent of all the exceptions, and the IO exception is a checked exception. In detail, I will give a different. I'm going to create a different tutorial for the exception, but right now, to make you understand about the exception, I'm telling you the exception is a parent of all the exceptions, and IO exception is the checked exception. If anything is a checked exception, then the parent can be throws from the parent class, and in child only the child of the parent class can be thrown. Means similar to this. If child is being thrown by the parent and I'm going to change and I'm going to throw the parent of exception, then it is not allowed in override. Moving to next. If I have kept the same, it is not any issue. So we can keep the same exception in parent and child, or we can throw the child from the child method of any parent exception. Now moving to different scenario. The scenario says if parent is not throwing anything and you are throwing the unchecked exception, then there is no issue. So this rule lies with only checked exception. In further videos, I will also explain in detail what is checked exception, what is unchecked exception, what is exception. So for now only I will emphasize this part of the exception. So I have covered most the topic related to this overloading and overriding, and that's it from a side in live demo. In next video, we are going to cover composition or has a relation in Java. Till then, thanks. Kindly like and share this video, subscribe to my channel, and leave comments if you want to know any clarification on your queries. Thanks once again.